Okay, so I've got all these different materials assigned now to these families. And I'm going to come back to some of the system families to start with. And so that might be some good revision for you as well on assigning materials to objects like that. So I've got a floor here. That's a system family. Hopefully you're starting to think about that. Walls, another system family. And the way you can tell straight away, if you're still not sure, when you select a regular family, and that's a loadable family or something you've made with model in place, like this one over here. So I can select that. Is it there? Okay, so you'll see in properties, it'll have a category here. And when you go to edit type, it has an option for family. Now, even if it's again, a family you've made with model in place, it'll give you that option there for family. And there's nothing in there because it's been made with model in place. But this one, if I go to edit type, you can see it's got family, and then it tells me what sort of family it is. A floor, being a system family, you can see over here it tells us it's a floor. And then if you go to edit type, you can see there it tells you it's a system family. And so they are still families, but they work very differently to all those other families because mainly the way you assign materials is different. And so if you go here to edit, then of course you've got the material option there. So remember that material is for this, this whole floor, which is a 150mm thick floor. And so I'm going to go and insert a new layer. And it's always good practice to do that. If it's just a floor finish, say it's timber flooring that I want here, I don't want the timber floorboards to go all the way through that 150mm thick floor. So it'll make your sections look better, and all the other drawings where you can see that floor being cut through, it'll make them better. And also, if you happen to see the floor from the bottom, you don't want to see the floorboards coming through usually. So, and again, I'm going to insert a new layer for that, and I'm going to move it up to the top. You can see there we've got these core boundaries, and so they're the edge of the structure. So if you're not sure how to work with those, just think of those as the boundary for your structural elements. So this here would be my structural layer, which I'll leave as 150. And then the upper layer there is going to be the finish. And you've got there two options for the finishes. So you've got finish 1 and finish 2. For you, you should be using finish 2 most of the time because you're doing interiors, and finish 2 is basically for interiors. Finish 1 is for exterior finishes, so things like brickwork or anything else you see on the outside of the building, and it's so they connect to each other.
So what's the difference?
So it gives you two different types of finishes. So you can have the exterior finishes connecting to other exterior finishes, and the interior finishes connecting to each other. So when they go through a wall, when two walls cross over each other, it doesn't try to connect the outside, say the brickwork from the outside, doesn't try to connect that to the plasterboard on the inside. So that's why you've got the two options. Okay, so generally you want to use finish 2 for interiors, and then I'm going to change the thickness there to just 20, and I'll go and make a nice floorboard material. So I'm going to hit browse to do that. Now you can start with virtually any of these materials really, or you can make a brand new material. So I've been showing you a lot how to duplicate these materials to make a new one. So I thought it's a good idea to show you how to make a new material from scratch. And so you've got an option here to create a new material. That's one option. Alternatively, you can bring up the full library, which you do with this button up here, and then it gives you this full Autodesk material library. If you expand that home, you'll see you've got Autodesk materials there, and you can go down to flooring, and you'll find there is some timber type flooring. It's not perfect, but it's all I need to start with. So I've got bamboo there, and I'll use that one. So I'm just going to hit the up arrow, and that adds it to the project. So there are lots of good materials in there. It can save you a bit of time setting it up. Otherwise, making a brand new material going here does something very similar. So bamboo is what it's called now, but I'm going to right click there and go to rename. And I'll call this timber flooring. Timber flooring. Okay, so notice how you can't change it down here. It's locked. So this is a hard-coded material library that you can't adjust. But once you've inserted it into your project, then you can change it. And then I'll hide that material library again. And now I'm going to go to the Appearance tab, right-click and then Replace. I just want to go through templates a little bit. So notice how before I do that, it's generic. Even though we know it's wood, it's a generic material template being used to give us those properties. So have a look at the different options you've got there. You've got reflectivity, transparency, cutout, self-elimination. So they're the maps or the mapping channels that, well, that's a bad way of saying it. Let's just say the mapping types. Shaders is the technical term, but probably doesn't mean a lot to you. So, so these are different options we've got for the generic material type. So I'm going to go and replace that now by right-clicking there and going to Replace. And I'm going to go to the Appearance folder, as usual, and then I'll go to Flooring, and then Wood, and I'll find a better timber. So I'll get Beechwood Galliano, that'll do. I'm going to double-click, and I'll close this, and you can see that this is a wood material type. So notice how I don't have all the options that I have with generic. Okay, so I've got 3 options, 3 panels. Don't worry about information, that's always there, but you often don't need to use that. But again, we've got then the wood option, which gives us the basic colour channel, and some other options there. Then we've got the relief pattern and the tint. So what if you wanted to be this material to have some transparency? You can't do that with wood. So I'd need to change it either by going and replacing it with something else or duplicate as generic. And if I do that, it does actually change the material a little bit, but basically it keeps the options or the main properties the same, but it adds in the extra slots. So you can make it transparent or self-eliminate if you want to make it glow. Okay, so again, I'll go back to there, back to Appearance, right-click, and then Replace. And so when you go to load the materials, have a look at the template that it's got as the starting point. So if I go to vinyl, you'll see we've got all these other different flooring materials, some of which are plastic. So I'll double-click there just so you can see when I bring that in. So that's a plastic material template, and it's got 1 extra slot that the wood one didn't have, but it still doesn't have everything. If I get one of these that's generic, so this vinyl floor over here, grid 1, okay, that's another generic one. So there are, I think there are about 6 or 7 different material types in Revit. They all come from 3S Max where you can see them all, but in Revit you can't really see them any other way than in here, where you go to the library to get them as a starting point. But you need to be aware of that. So I'll go back to the wood though. Okay, so if it's just a normal wood floor, often you can use the wood material type. And you know that you can always get those extra options just by, again, going to duplicate as generic if you have to. Oh, yeah, sure.
If you pick the stain
Yeah.
and you put a darker, that means that it's going to get darker?
That's right, so if you tick the stain, that's right. It does affect the colour. So there you can also make it lighter. So notice how if I tick it there and it's close to white, yeah, it'll make it actually lighter. But then here, if I go down and make it darker, you've got to make it fairly dark for it to have a really noticeable effect. But there you can see it's starting to get darker. You can also make it more coloured. But look, honestly, I've never had much luck with the stain option, just because it's hard to get the control that you want with that option. So I find a better option if you want a certain colour for your wood, edit it in Photoshop.
Or get another picture?
Yeah, well, just get that picture and edit in Photoshop. really easy. That's what I do. Every material that I use for my own work, I've spent a lot of time on the texture in Photoshop. I don't just take it the way it is. It's usually much better. So I'm going to go and change this now. So here, if you click on the image name, which you can see there, Beechwood Galliano, I'm going to browse, and then I'm going to, well, we'll start with this one. So let's say we wanted to adjust that. So I can right click there, and then go to open with, and then, well, Photoshop should be in the list here, but it isn't, so I'll go to choose another app, and then hopefully Photoshop will come up here. No. There it is. Okay, so you'll see in a moment there are all sorts of options for adjusting the image in Revit, but one of the best tips I can give you about working with materials is that you should do as much as you can in Photoshop first. And believe it or not, there are people who just do this for a living. In other words, in those 3D production workflows where they've got big teams of people working on movies and all the other things where you see lots of 3D work, there are people who just do modelling, there are people who just do lighting, and there are people who just do texturing. And those texture people, they do a bit of work in the 3D programs, but they do most of their work in Photoshop. And yeah. So I've just opened the file there. You can see this timber file. I've opened it in Photoshop. So rather than trying to play with the stain options in Revit, it's much better just to come into here, go to Image, Adjustments, and then Brightness, Contrast, Exposure, and then Hue Saturation. They're the three options that you can use, probably the best options to use to adjust the darkness, to add more darkness in. So Brightness, Contrast is okay, so you can make it less bright, which is similar to staining. Right, that's okay. I'm going to cancel that and show you some other ways. So if you go again to Adjustments and then try, well, Levels is another good one. Sorry, I should mention Levels. Levels is brilliant. So with Levels, if you bring the middle up, that's another way of making it darker without losing all the colour. And you can play with the bottom range as well. The top range is going to make it brighter, but that's sort of narrowing the colour range. But you can do some really interesting things with levels. So have a look at that. That's a great option, actually. But I'll cancel that and show you some other ways. So again, under Adjustments, you've got Exposure, which is a fantastic, that's actually my preferred way of adjusting brightness usually. So with the exposure controls there, you can make it darker. What I really like about exposure is you've got the gamma correction. So you can use that to correct any colour information that you're losing that you don't want to lose. Offset doesn't work quite as well because that's a global, or it adjusts the whole image, and usually you don't want that. I'll cancel that again and show you one last option, which is Hue Saturation. So with Hue Saturation, you've got the option for lightness there, which again makes it darker, and that can work pretty well as well. I think with an image like this, I'd say probably Levels is the best one, but it really depends on the image.
What about if you want to make that timber not that red, but a grey?
Oh yeah, okay, so if you want to make it more grey, what I'd do is make it darker with the levels, and then I would go to Hue Saturation, and then use the saturation to increase the or decrease the colour amount. So take it to the left there, you can see it's going more grey, which gives you more of that aged look as well. And then I could maybe do a bit of lightness there. Lightness and also brightness contrast tend to lose some of the detail though, or the colour information, so I might go back to levels then, and so you can see the curve, how much it changed. And yeah. So okay, so I've done that, and so now I'm going to save it as a new file. And I'm going to save it somewhere that we can get to, so we'll go to the folder. Okay, so now I just need to browse and find that new file. No, so it's in... that's in wood. Okay, so this network's a bit slow. There we go. Okay, so that's got my new image. Now, you can see then we've got these other options. So the finish is on semi-gloss varnish, and that's why it's so reflective. So if I go back to satin, then it's less reflective, or if I go to unfinished, it's virtually flat. Then you've got the relief pattern. So a nice thing you've got with the wood material is the option to use based on wood grain. So that uses, gives you a bit of depth, but from the image here. So I'll leave it on that, but I'll show you some other options for the grain in a second, or for the relief in a second. So, okay, so with that, now if I go to realistic, I can see the wood material. I know it's very hard to see on the projector, but it is there. So, I'm going to change that to a better timber. If I rendered that, I'd see it, but it's probably not what I want. So, I'm going to go back now and try yet another image. So, try different images. The ones in the default library aren't the best, and you'll find much better images, especially for things like timber. If you search online, you'll find easily hundreds of much better timber textures that are free. So in here, I know I've got one called Cedar Fence, which is a...
Any particular type of file to make an account?
No, pretty much any format, any image file. Yeah. Okay, so I've got the file there that I want. I'm going to make sure it's the right one. Okay, so this is the file, but I'm going to click on, so I've been clicking on the file name. This time I'm going to click on the image swatch, and then we can see the size as well. So it's quite small. You can see there it's 685 mil, and that's the size of the image, the whole image. So I'll close this and just show you back in the view. So again, it's probably hard to see on the projector. If I zoom in, you can probably see it a bit better. So it's too small. So I'm going to go back again to edit type, edit the material. It's also got a stain, which makes it harder to see. So if I turn the stain off, it might look too bright there, but that doesn't really matter so much. The preview only gives you an indication. So if you look back here, much easier to see. So that stain, it really is hard to work with. Sometimes it can give a good effect, but I think it's easier to use Photoshop. So again, now if I go back and look at that material and appearance, click on the image swatch, and then we can work out the proper size. So how big do you think it should be? Well, how big should a floorboard be? Oh, the width. How wide do you think each board should be?
This one is like 100 per...
Yeah, at least 100. 120 is pretty standard, but 150 for rendering is probably more common because you often need to make things a bit bigger than they are in real life to see them the way you want to. So exactly. So that's right. So if you count the number of boards in the image, so there's 10 there. So that means you make it 1200. That's right. Or actually, I'll make it 1500. Right, so that they're 150 each. And normally you can just leave the proportions or lock the constraints. So, oh yeah, that's right. It's an old trick. Oversize. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I didn't know about, I
Yeah.
didn't know about that. Okay. Because
Yeah.
it was meant
Sometimes double the real size
okay.
is what you need.
Double the real size.
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or even bigger. You can really oversize things a lot sometimes. But you can see quite clearly there. We know that's a bit bigger than it would be in real life, but it looks right in the perspective. So then, now I don't need to keep selecting the floor every time. I can just go to materials now, because I know the name of the material, and just edit it there. So then, so that's the appearance, and I'll come back and look at some of these other slots in a second, but then also it's worth spending a bit of time on graphics. So I'm sure you all know if you tick use render appearance, it gets the colour from the appearance tab. But the colour is a single colour value. So it's basically averaging all the colours from this image to give this colour. And that's probably not a very good colour. It's okay to start with, but then I can turn this off and it'll let me adjust the colour so I can make it a bit lighter maybe. Yeah. And then also surface patterns are usually good for timber flooring. So if I just click on the pattern option there, and there's a general rule for surface patterns, you generally want model. So then I'll put in 150mm horizontal and see if that's the right direction. Sometimes you just got to use a bit of trial and error for this. So there, you can see it's changed the direction because of the way the mapping's done. And mapping in Revit is pretty much automated, so you can't control the mapping. There are some options to control it, but it's much harder than in, say, 3ds Max or another program like that. So, but I'll show you how to change it. So, firstly, I'm going to change back to hidden line. So you can see there we've got the lines going the right way. Yeah, that's how I want them. Now, if I wanted to change that direction, then the easiest option, you can rotate those lines, but it's usually easier to do it in the material settings. So here, instead of 150mm horizontal, I could use the 150mm vertical if there is one. Now there isn't, so I can make one. So if we look at this, it's on 0 degrees. So if I make a new, and we'll call it 150mm vertical, and set the angle to 90. Okay, so that's going to give me lines going the other way. So that works. There is an option as well to rotate those if you don't know. So you can, okay, if you zoom in there, you can actually select the lines. So if you use Tab, you can select the lines in your patterns. This is actually the only way you can adjust mapping in Revit. In most other programs, there are a few more controls than this. So if I select that line, then I can use rotate and change the angle. Yeah. So it changes the pattern, but what's really interesting is it also changes, so you can see the patterns change there as well, it also changes the image. Yeah. So that's it. So that's how you control it. So usually the first thing you want is the lines from the pattern going the same direction as the lines from your appearance. Yeah, that's it. So match them both, then you can adjust them together. And then if I go now back to here, so I could rotate that further.
Can you just go there and rotate it without going to the suggested in the material? Or you have to first adjust it into the material and then rotate it on the
You can do it directly in the material, that's right. So I'll show you that too. So, okay, so the other way would be to do it all with the material properties. So if I go back to here.
It's either way.
Yeah,
correct?
that's right, exactly. So if I change this back to 150mm horizontal, so now they're back to going this way. But if I go now back to realistic, they're going across. So I don't want that. So I'll go back to materials now. And so instead of changing the surface pattern, this time I'll go to the appearance, click on the image swatch again, and you can change the angle of that image to 90. So they go across. Oh, so now they're going the other way. Okay, so you've got a few ways of changing the angle.
So, for example, if you are playing with tiles in a bathroom that you want it diagonal,
Yeah.
you have the picture of the tile,
Yeah.
and then you change that into the picture. To,
Yes.
For example, if you want a diagonal 45 degrees.
Yeah, change it in the material
and then
appearance.
Tile, and
Yeah.
then tile to repeat it.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, it always repeats.
It always repeats.
Yeah, unless you tell it not to. Yeah, I would always just leave it repeating. So yeah, the repeating option is here. When you click on the image,
Unless you say no.
you've got this option horizontal tile.
Yes, yes.
Always leave it on tile. There's no point using none. That's just going to give you one repeat. It's
Yes.
like a decal,
Okay.
which you don't need with materials. So that's it. If you can do that, you can probably do most of the things you need to with materials. But I'll just show you with the with transparent materials, you've got a few other options. So I'll make a wall, and I'm going to make it just with the.
If you want to have a floor in glass,
Yep.
you use the floor, and then you just change the material. To
Yeah.
glass.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yep. You can do that. Yep. So here, I'm just going to use a regular wall. I'm going to make it glass. I'm going to go to Edit Type, Duplicate. I'm going to call it Glass Wall. And I'll edit this and then change the material. So I'm going to start with the glass material. And again, I'm going to duplicate this. And I'll call it Glass Coloured. Then I'm going to change the appearance. And notice how here, this one's got two above the hand there. So that's when you really need to be careful, because it means there are other materials associated with this appearance. So you've got two options. You can either duplicate or replace. You have to do one of those. Or duplicate is generic. Any of those options there. And then notice how again it's a glazing material. So I want glazing, so I'm just going to duplicate. And then you've got a 0, which is normally what you want. And then you've got these options for coloured, which actually work pretty well, but they only give a basic tint, or they do give a bit of colour, but if you want to adjust that further, again you have to duplicate as generic. So then you've got the colour swatch here, which you can use to adjust the colour, but you've also got the tint option, which you can use to give more colour. It can actually be a different colour altogether. And then you get those two colours combined, which can be really interesting if you want to get into the physics of it. But
Or because the glass has their rainbow.
yeah, so the way it would work is if you've got a certain coloured glass, and then you put a plastic film over it, that gives the tint.
Okay.
So
Like
yeah.
the camera, when you use.
Yeah, exactly like filters, like gels.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay.
So here though, we've got the transparency option, and there you get a bit more control with that as well. So you've got here the amount of transparency. So higher, it's more transparent, lower is less. The other option is translucency. So translucency works a bit differently to transparency, and actually can give you some really interesting effects with coloured glass especially.
So what does it mean translucent?
So it's semi-transparent, and it puts the colour through the transparency, essentially. So I'll just, and also then you've got reflectivity. So Now, reflectivity is a funny one. I'll come back to that, but you've got two values there, direct and oblique. So the general rule is you want the direct reflections lower than the obliques. And I'll give you another example of that in a moment. So I'm just going to put in a glass partition here so you can see it. Okay, so there's my glass partition. It's got the colour, but I can't really see. And I might just bring the level up there to a bit higher. Oh, not, sorry, bottom constraint, top constraint. Okay, so if I render that, even on draft, should give me some idea. I don't have any lights in here, so I might need to check my sun direction. Yeah, I'm not going to get a lot of light, but you can at least see that it does have some colour. Yeah, but it's fairly light. So to get darker glass or more of the colour, you often have to make it darker than what it looks. So you can see there again, this colour is fairly light, but if I make that much darker, because it's transparent, it's not going to be that dark when it's rendered. Okay, so you can see there it's still not that dark. So, final thing I thought I'd show you is decals, because I know you might not have used those for a little while, and sort of make sure you've got an idea about those. We'll do some more on this later, but yeah, make sure you know about decals. They're really effective in Revit. So decals are similar to materials. Has anyone not used decals?
No,
You have, yeah. Yeah, they're really useful. Okay, so if you, again, on the Insert tab, go to Decal.
This one I show you, like a picture. You want to put a picture?
Yeah, they're very similar to materials. So here you can go to Create New Decal if it's the first time. So I'll call this, let's say, Poster. Okay, then you need to click Browse button to choose your image. And I've got some paintings here. Will do. Okay, so I've chosen my image. I'm going to just click OK, and then it's going to place it on the wall and change the view to realistic. So I can see my image. Now I'm going to select it and then stretch it afterwards. That's usually the easiest way. You can untick this if you want to stretch it and change the proportions. Otherwise, it's that easy. You can make them also have transparency in parts if you want to have it for stained glass or something like that. But otherwise,
Transparency.
yeah.
Would you put another layer or what?
You can, yeah. You can use a mask to do the transparency if you want to, yeah.
A mask.
Yeah. So if you select the image, you'll see when you get at the decal,
Yeah.
it's got this option here for cutouts, and then you can choose an image, and that'll put a mask on to cut out parts of it. So that can be really effective, yeah. So if you want to do a different shape as well, if you don't want it to be just a rectangle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you want it round.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, I'll do it here. So I'll do a mask. So, okay, so I'll go to image file. I'm going to browse, and I've got this image here. So I'm going to go and edit that with Photoshop and show you how to make a quick mask. Okay, so there's my image. So I'll just select the white areas.
I always went to another shape. I didn't know how to get another shape.
Yeah. So let's make that a bit higher.
I mean, it's always a rectangle or a square, but if you want another shape.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I'm just selecting this.
Also, you make the background transparent.
Yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, this is classic with these, great painters. They used lots of very uneven colours to get that nice effect. So it's not all just white. I thought it'd be a bit easy to select, but I'll get it. So here we go. We'll just deselect that with a polygon. That'll do. It's just like Mudgee. If you look up close at his paintings, he had exactly the same sort of uneven colour palette.
Do you press Control when you select in
Yeah, Alt to deselect in Photoshop and then Shift to add, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so there we are. So there's my selection. I'll just, actually I better just take these bits out. It's going to be very messy. Yeah, so I'm just trying to select these, or deselect the coloured bits and have the white parts selected, which I thought would be pretty quick and easy, but of course, there we are. Okay, that bit's going to be a problem too, so we'll fix that. So it's breathing up a bit on me, but there we go, you get it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to fill this with the colour, and well, just to show you good practice, I'm going to make a new layer and fill it on the new layer. That's nearly always good practice, and actually I'll again keep trying to show you good practice. I'm going to get a really unusual colour. So that's a really good tip when you're trying to put masks in. Don't use black and white unless you know that they're going to work. Often it's better to use a colour that you know isn't used very often. So this bright pink that I've got isn't a colour that I'd use very often. Some people would, but I don't. So I'm going to save this as a new file. So that's a Photoshop file, remember. So to use that in Revit, I need to save as, again, as a JPEG or a format like that Revit can use. And that's a good option with Photoshop because then it keeps your layers in the Photoshop file and you can just have that copy for Revit to use. So there's my new mask file. And then you've got the option for the colour. So it's sorry, they used to give you the option for colour. Yeah, that's a bit strange. So there was an option for colour before. I don't know why that's not showing. Yeah, that's for the bump. So I don't know why it's not giving us a mask option. Transparency. No, that's... Anyhow, I'll show you what to do if that happens. So we'll just click OK. And you can see then it's masking the whole thing, and that's not right. So, okay, so I've got to do a bit more in Photoshop.
Just showing the colours ones, right?
Yes, that's right. So I'm going to fill this with black.
Especially when you do material for tree flowers.
So I'm going to, again, just a couple of little Photoshop tricks. You probably know these. I'm going to select inverse. So do you know about this one to change your selection? Okay, so I've made a file that's black and white. And that's normally how a mask works. So I'm going to save this again over that mask file.
It's going to be black and white.
And yeah, yeah.
And now
I'm sure you could use other colours before in Revit, but obviously it's changed. So, okay, so there we are. So now back into Revit, and I'll just check that it's found my new mask file. So there's the mask. And there we are. So now I'll get the wall colour coming through where it's black in my mask. So maybe I'll change the...
showing her the white.
Exactly. So I'll go and change that wall colour so it's a bit clearer. So I'm going to duplicate this wall. And let's call it feature wall. And I'll change the colour to something that's a bit brighter. Yep, red, that'll do. Yep, recording, yep. Okay, there we are. So now, the image is cut out around that colour. So we'll go back and make the colour maybe a bit less bright, more of a sort of typical Indian red, I suppose. That is an Indian red, but I'll make it not so bright. Not so dark, I mean. So there we are. So you can see the image cut through. And the border won't come through. So when you render that, it should see you should see it without that edge.
So you see the box here, but
Yeah.
not when you render.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
But you could mask for flowers, right? And
Yeah,
you
for
could
plants.
show
That's
you
right.
could
Exactly.
do that.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
you don't know how to do it.
No, I
Yep.
didn't.
Makes sense now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I'll just put some lights in there because
Image for orchid, for example. The orchid,
Yes.
that's the thing. Very organic shape.
yes. Oh no, decals. That's a good question. Actually, yeah. So decals can't go onto anything. They can only go onto system families generally. So walls, floors, ceilings, but not onto families. No. If you want them in a family, then you've got to use a material generally. You can use decals within families, but it's a bit tricky. And yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'll get a light.
So you get the picture and then you manipulate the picture to it.
Ah, sorry. I don't want to spot, so I'm just so trying to get a studio light. So don't follow what I'm doing exactly because studio lights are probably used too much by a lot of people, but if you're not using them or if you don't know about them, it's good to know that they're there as a quick way of adding extra light to your spaces. But normally you want to use proper light fitting. So you've got to render that with, in this case I'll try artificial only to start with. Okay, so you can see there, it's very dark, but if I go to adjust the exposure now, you can see then quite clearly the image cut out. Yeah. Okay, so again, studio lights are okay for things like this, if you're just trying to do some test renders, or just trying to add a bit of extra light, but otherwise, they're going to create these big pools of light in areas you don't want, these reflections over here. So usually light fittings will work better. But again, it's good to know about them for adding a bit of extra light sometimes.
It's a good idea to use those studio lights and then in Photoshop add the light.
Oh, no. No, much better if you put in a ceiling and then put proper light fittings. So if I go back to here, I'll show you quickly how to get the ceiling plan set up as well, because the ceiling there, also the walls aren't visible because of my view settings. So I've got to go to the view range firstly, and you can see the problem. It's that the top is not high enough. So the general rule of thumb is you want the top to be the floor above. So here, my floor above is actually level 1.
And it has to be the roof. Oh no.
Not always, no. So this is ground floor, or it's actually lower ground floor, but the floor above is level 1 for me. It depends on
Yeah.
Because the one
your design.
floor is going to be above the level.
Yeah.
It's making nothing sense.
No.
Remove ground. Go to the one.
So now I can see the walls, and then if I go to make a ceiling, I'm going to go to sketch ceiling, and then pick to choose my walls, pick walls, and then to set the height, I'm going to set the height also to level 1, and then make the height offset minus 300. So tick to finish, and then I'll have a look at that in a section before I go much further, so that you can see, so you can all see where the ceiling is. So you can see it's actually still a bit high because my floor's a bit thicker than I thought it was. Oh no, my floor's too low. My floor's actually below level 1, so I'm going to change the height offset of that to 0, and now I can see the ceiling is below my floor. Then I can go back to my ceiling plan and place some lights. Now I want to spend a whole class on lighting, so I'm not going to go too far with this, but I'll quickly get some lights in there. So I'll just use the lights from the library. We'll get some better lights later. So downlight spot is what I'm going to use. And I'll just put some roughly where the studio lights are. So I'll get rid of those studio lights now and go back and render that again. And you'll see it should be much better.
Because actually it's going to give the shape better.
Yeah, and also it's not going to give light in directions that are unnatural. Okay, so you can see there it's just coming down. I still need to adjust the exposure maybe to make it a bit brighter. But you can see I don't have those strange pools of light on the ceiling or the strange reflections that I had in the glass. And it's just generally more balanced. I probably need more lights, but it's still going to work better than having studio lights.
So that's a better way. And then you go to Photoshop, take that off, and put
Oh, no.
the lights that you
Oh yeah, if you want a more complicated chandelier or
Yes.
something, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, still find a light that's close to your chandelier, so they're pendant lights. So use those and then put your chandelier over in Photoshop. Exactly, that's right. So you can still sometimes add a studio light or two, but you don't want to do all the lights with studio lights. It always looks bad. So anyhow, I'll spend a whole class on lighting. I just wanted to get you started on that, but you need to have some sort of lighting setup to then test out your materials. So you need to start them at the same time.